Good morning, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group at the outset. Allow me to commend you for your excellent manner in which you are conducting the work of this Commission. The African Group thanks the Secretary General for his report submitted under the agenda item and takes note of the recommendation contained therein. This year's season comes at the time when the world is dealing with the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have witnessed a reversal of some of the gains that were attended, and the threat to global effort to achieve women empowerment and gender equality has become even greater. The pandemic has had a negative impact on the livelihood of women and girls and had increased the vulnerability of women to violence. We need to ensure that COVID-19 does not reverse the gender equality progress achieved in recent decades, including women's participation in public affairs. Therefore, as we build the back better, we need to, amongst other things, ensure that decision-making bodies are gender balanced. Mr. Chair, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action is the most progressive blueprint for action and roadmap for the advancement of women's rights. In this regard, we affirm our commitment to full implementations of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We recognize that legislation provides the foundation for a holistic and effective approach in addressing the root causes of gender equality and in eliminating barriers to women's full and equal participation in public and private life. In the same vein, the international legal framework obligates and guides states in the adoption of their own laws to address violence against women and girls. Member states adhere to a range of international instruments such as the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on Rights and Persons with Disabilities, the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families, and the relevant conventions of the International Labour Organization, among others. The group recognizes that governments have the responsibility of developing national policies and priorities in accordance with their international obligations and commitments to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, and that the United Nations system entities should assist governments in accordance with national laws and taking into account priorities, realities and capacities. Mr. Chair, the African Group believes that several factors, including poverty and lack of empowerment, as well as marginalization of women resulting from their exclusion from social, economic, and political policies, place women at risk of violence. The group is also of the view that violence against women impedes the socio-economic development of communities and states, as well as the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is therefore necessary to strengthen access to educational opportunities, and the provision of quality education, training, and skill development opportunities for all women and girls are fundamental prerequisites to women's full participation in public life. There is no question that women's agency, voice, and capacities are critical to local dialogues, better policies, and sustainable development. Representation and participation of women at all decision-making levels is a critical goal for gender equality and women's empowerment. Increasing the quantity, prominence, and authority of women in decision-making positions will entail more adequate training in leadership skill, as well as ongoing training and support for women leaders. Mr. Chair, while the marginalization of African women is rooted in historical, political, socio-economic, and cultural context, their fundamental rights have, however, been a priority in Africa. The Assembly of Head of States and Governments of the African Union has demonstrated its commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment through the adoption of landmark equality and landmark provisions and statutes. This is reflected in relevant provisions of the Constructive Act of the African Union, the Tolman Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa, and the new Partnership for African Development, NIPAD. These instruments provide the basis for holding African governments accountable for advancing the status and fundamental rights of women in their respective countries. The group applauds the ADF6 held in Addis Ababa in 2008 that recalled for a 3-year Africa-wide campaign to eliminate violence against women and girls. The campaign focused on fostering universal responsibility to protect women and girls, as well as preventing and punishing all forms of violence against women and girls. It also addressed underlying factors such as the social economic causes of vulnerability, including women's weak legal rights to land, housing, and property, and the social code of silence surrounding violence against women. Indeed, the African Union Agenda 2063 advocates for full gender equality in all spheres of life. In this regard, the group believes that it is important to ensure women's full, equal, and effective participation in all levels in conflict prevention, management and resolution, peace negotiation, and peace building, and to develop strategies to eliminate negative gender stereotypes in all spheres of life, including in the media, and foster the positive portrayal of women and girls as leaders and decision makers at all levels and in all areas. The African group recognizes that all human rights are universal, indivisible, independent, and interrelated, and we call on the international community to treat human rights, including the rights to development, globally in a fair and equal manner. We also believe that it is the duty of states to promote and protect all human rights and fundamental freedoms, bearing in mind the significance of national and regional particularities and various historical, cultural, and religious backgrounds. Mr. Chair, in order to recognize the effective implementation of preventive measures to violence and to open opportunities for participation of all women and girls in political and public life, the African group believes that there is the need to, among other things, create empowerment opportunities for women as well as ensure their access to positions of decision-making and leadership. And for victims of violence, it is important to expand referral mechanisms between multi-sectoral services and implement information sharing protocols to ensure the safety of the victims and to establish protection and support services for survivors and victims. The group therefore calls for the implementation of the comprehensive commitments made by the international community on development, including transfer of official development assistance, transfer of technology, access to markets, and on gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. This will ensure women's equal access to economic resources, enhance their participation in decision making, and advance the empowerment of women and girls by uplifting their capabilities, which will enable them to enjoy access to these resources through international cooperation. In conclusion, the African Group affirms its support to end violence against women and girls and recognize the role of family in this regard. We believe that more than ever, there is the need to enhance the capacity of the family to prevent and eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. Furthermore, the group encourages formal and informal education programs that will moderate the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women of all ages in order in order to eliminate all negative stereotypes, prejudice, harmful practices, and all other practices based on sex. This will not doubt further contribute to our effort for eliminating harmful practices and all forms of violence against women and girls in all its manifestation. It is necessary to fund and support public information campaign with positive messages and images of women's role in public life to help change stereotypes and further promote the contribution of women in the creation of media activities and priorities. I thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Amo Aziza Barrow, speaking on behalf of the largest and most represented group of African states. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Mariana Vieira da Silva, Minister of State for the Presidency of Portugal, to speak on behalf of the European Union. Please.
Mr. Chair, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries, the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania, the country of the Stabilization and Association Process and potential candidate, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and Georgia, aligned themselves with this statement. Gender equality can never be taken for granted. Instability, fragility, conflict, climate change, just to mention a few critical issues, and lately the COVID-19 pandemic, are exacerbating gender inequalities and threatening hard-won gains everywhere within the EU and beyond. Promoting gender equal representation in Parliament as well as in governments is critical. This means removing institutional and structural constraints, discriminatory laws, as well as cultural, organizational, and attitudinal barriers and stereotypes. Today, the EU calls for scaling up efforts and collaboration to address systemic discrimination, including multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Promotion and empowerment of women in parliament and political life is crucial not only for decisions being credible, legitimate, and more sustainable. Moreover, gender equal representation in corporate sector, particularly in the most senior decision-making positions, is key for the promotion of more diverse and innovative business environments. Gender stereotypes coupled with exclusion of women from economic, social and political power and structural inequalities that hinder women's participation in the labour market, including the persistent and unequal divisions of unpaid work and domestic work, create a fertile ground for fear and withdrawal. The EU views equal, full, effective and meaningful participation of all women and girls as an unequivocal part of democratic and human rights-based governance. It is critical to work towards women's equal, full and effective and meaningful participation in all their diversity in all spheres and levels of public and political life. Participation of women and girls with disabilities requires in-depth and more targeted attention and effort. Full participation of all women and girls in public life and political discourse is crucial and adequately translating their perspectives, knowledge and skills into policies to achieve gender equality. To this end, the EU equality underscores the important role of men and boys and of civil society at large. Sexual and gender-based violence, online and offline, continues to be a major barrier for the participation of women and girls in politics and public life. The scale of the problem globally remains alarming. 1 in 3 women has experienced physical and/or sexual violence. 3 months ago, Together with countries from all regions, the EU launched a new group of friends at the UN aimed at doing just that. The group of friends counts 91 members. Another concrete example of our commitment is the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative, the largest investment to date in preventing and eliminating violence. In recent years, online gender-based violence, including threats, harassment, and cyberbullying, has become one of the key barriers to women and girls' full, equal, effective, and meaningful participation. The effects are deplorable and negatively affect the right of women and girls to participate in public life and political decision-making, and attempts to bridge the digital gender divide. Targeting in politics creates a double burden. Women are being attacked both for their profession and as women. Acts or threats of violence can have severe physical or mental health impacts, lead to self-censorship, and to women entirely retreating from their profession or the public sphere, including online platforms. There is no space for complacency. To harness the potential of girls and women, we must respect their choices that each woman and girl makes. We must enable all of them to dare to lead, dare to live. This is essential also for our shared future, for finding solutions to pressing challenges such as climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, and strengthening climate resilience, including through climate-smart technology and solutions that support livelihoods of women. Strikingly, although women around the globe are at the helm of effective and inclusive COVID-19 response efforts, they are frequently underrepresented at highest levels of decision-making and leadership in sectors that are directly affected by COVID-19 pandemic, including in the health sector and in political arenas at local, national, and international level. We must address the issue of equal representation for the benefit of future generations. Mr. Chair, the European Union aspires to be a union of equality and a global frontrunner on gender equality. The EU reaffirms its commitment to the international framework on gender equality, the full enjoyment of all human rights by all women and girls, and their empowerment. We have a vision and an ambition to reach out to the largest number of women and girls and make a real difference in their everyday lives. We wish to ground our support and interventions in strategies that empower all women and girls at all levels. The EU underlines the role of gender equality in building back better in the post-COVID-19 world. Women play a critical role in the prevention and resolution of conflict, as well as in the peace building. We must redouble our efforts to fully implement the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. The EU remains committed to the promotion, protection and fulfillment of all human rights and to the full and effective implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action and the Programme of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the outcomes of their review conferences, and remains committed to sexual and reproductive health and rights in this context. Having that in mind, the EU reaffirms its commitment to the promotion, protection and fulfillment of the right of every individual to have full control over and decide freely and responsibly on the matters related to their sexuality and sexual and reproductive health, free from discrimination, coercion and violence. The EU further stresses the need for universal access to quality and affordable, comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information, education, including comprehensive sexuality education and healthcare services. Last but not least, the EU recognizes the essential role that a vibrant civil society, including women's rights movements, young people, and women activists, plays in advancing women's and girls' leadership, meaningful participation, and gender equality. In this regard, the EU highlights the 2021 Generation Equality Forum and supports the efforts by UN Women to foster momentum on meaningful youth engagement and participation for gender equality. The EU condemns legislation that unduly restricts the work of civil society and underlines the need to provide sustainable funding for these actors. The EU also strongly condemns reprisals and violence against women's rights organizations, women human rights defenders, as well as women peace builders, including those engaging with the UN mechanisms. The EU stands with you. I also wish to thank the dedicated CSO representatives in the EU delegation. Accelerating the implementation of the commitments I have mentioned is in the interest of the presidents and future generations. Change in these difficult times requires hard work, unity, and determination. As the EU, we are ready to step up action. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of State for Presidency of Portugal speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. And now I give the floor to Her Excellency Moumina Ahmed Hassan, Minister for Women and Family of Djibouti, speaking on behalf of a group of Arab states. Please. I understand that there is a technical issue, and now I will ask the floor to be given to Her Excellency Nyaleti Montlane, Minister of Gender, Children and Social Affairs of Mozambique, speaking on behalf of Southern African Development Community. Please. Mozambique, please. If the video, yes, please.
Chair of the Commission on the Status of Women, Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to make this statement as the Republic of Mozambique on behalf of the Southern African Development Community, which comprises of 16 countries. Allow me, Chairperson, at the very outset, to take this opportune moment to extend on behalf of SADC our sincere congratulations to you for presiding over the proceedings of the 65th section of the Commission of the Status of Women. As SADC, we fully support you in the discharge of your mandate. Excellencies, at the outset, I would like to highlight our inevitable disappointment owing to the cancellation of all events during CSW 64 in 2020, which denied the world in general and our region in particular the golden opportunity to share our review and celebrate 25 years of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, as well as reflecting on the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. It is our hope that this year's theme, women's full and effective participation in decision making in public life, as well as the elimination of gender based violence for the achieving of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, will allow the space to briefly explore issues that were put aside due to last year's cancellation, and to also share our response to the current pandemic on women's rights in all areas. Indeed, all our programmatic endeavors show our conviction that women's empowerment and their full participation on the basis of equality in all spheres of society, including participation in the decision making processes and access to power, are fundamental for the achievement of equality, development, and peace. Chairperson, it would interest you to know that is at a critical juncture because its 2015-2020 Strategic Development Plan ended in 2020, and the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan 2020 to 2030 was approved. The RISDP 2020-2030 objective is to have a SADC region where women and men are optimally engaged in the drive for its development and advancement towards a positive future through being empowered to actively and fully participate in all aspects of society with full access to socioeconomic opportunities and human rights. In furtherance of gender equality and women's empowerment agenda, these are envisaged to be achieved through first, accelerated implementation of the prioritized areas of the SADC Gender and Development Protocol, and second, strengthen gender mainstreaming mechanisms and technical capacity at both national and regional levels to address issues such as gender based violence, promoting representation and participation of women in politics and decision making, and strengthening meaningful women's economic empowerment. These echo very well with this year's theme as well. The RISDP is intrinsically transformational in that its outcomes aim to mitigate, if not eliminate, the major constraints hindering gender equality and women's empowerment, and to catapult SADC to higher levels by making gender a catalyst and enabler of the RISDP. This means that gender will permeate the pillars of RISDP, ensuring that they are gender responsive, and only then can commit to radically transform critical structures and actualize gender equality and women's empowerment by 2030. That is, gender parity will be attained. Distinguished delegates, assessment of the SADC Protocol on Gender in Development and Gender Policies, Strategies, and Action Plans indicate that all 15 member states, not counting Comoros, have ratified the Convention on all forms of discrimination against women, and the provisions of the Convention have all been domesticated in the SADC region through the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development. All member states have signed the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development, with the exception of Mauritius and Comoros. Following the revision of the protocol in 2016, 13 member states have signed the agreement amending the protocol, with South Africa and Malawi ready to sign in the next summit. The majority of member states undertook comprehensive constitutional reviews of their domestic laws in recognition of the need for alignment and harmonization with the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development. Further, it is notable that constitutions and statutes outlawing discrimination on the basis of sex are present in all member states. Special measures for the promotion of women's participation in political and decision making processes have been adopted by 13 countries, except for Botswana and Angola. Constitutional reforms have been undertaken by 11 countries, and 5 countries are still outstanding at various levels of governance albeit with some retrogressing. Governance sector made significant progress in increasing the proportion of female representation in parliament, although female representation is still short of the 50% target. A number of countries, including Angola and Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe, have managed to go beyond 30% female representation in their lower houses, with South Africa having 42% of female representation. However, some countries are lagging behind, with DRC and Botswana hovering around 10% female representation in parliament. At a regional level, however, there has been a marginal increase of 1% in female representation from 22.2% in 2009 to 23.2% in 2019. The commendable performance of some of the countries mentioned above has mainly been attributed to electoral systems of proportional representation and affirmative action policies of some of the political parties in these countries, as is the case of Mozambique and South Africa. In other countries, including Angola, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania, some constitutional measures are credited with increasing women representation in parliament. At cabinet level, there has been a general strengthening of the average percentage of women occupying cabinet positions. In terms of gender based violence, significant progress has been made as 12 countries have laws specifically on domestic violence, while only 3 countries, DRC, Lesotho, and Tanzania, are yet to develop such laws. Only 2 countries have no laws on sexual assault, being Angola and Seychelles. In the health sector, all SADC member states have programs, policies, or interventions aimed at tackling the problem of maternal mortality. This has resulted in significant decline in maternal mortality rates in several countries. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned above, SADC has vigorously embarked on the formulation, deliberation, adoption, and implementation of regional protocols, strategies, policies, and programs. A non exhaustive list highlighting issues related to this year's theme include the 2008 Protocol on Gender and Development, revised in 2016, with overarching objective to improve and provide for the empowerment of women, to eliminate discrimination and to achieve gender equality and equity through the development and implementation of responsive legislation, policies, programs, and projects. The protocol is also expected to harmonize the implementation at national level with regional, continental, and international instruments on gender equality and equity. The regional multidimensional women's economic empowerment program to promote women's economic empowerment and gender responsive development in order to contribute to social inclusion and justice by 2030. The regional strategy and framework for action to addressing gender based violence 2019-2030 aims to provide a common platform and guidance at regional and member states levels for effective, holistic, and coordinated approach for addressing gender based violence, consistent with Part 6 on Gender Based Violence Articles 2025 of the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development. The Regional Strategy on Women, Peace and Security 2018-2022 to implement UNSCR 1325 and its associated resolutions. Its goal is to ensure that women fully and meaningfully participate in SADC's peace and security structures and processes through mainly mainstreaming gender into the SADC's peace and security architecture. Chairperson, in the light of the above, we are routinely interrogating our progress in the implementation of all our gender instruments and commitments as enshrined in RISDP, the SADC Indicative Plan for the Organ on Politics, Defense, and Security Cooperation, and our Protocol on Gender and Development in order to identify key challenges
I thank the Minister of Mozambique speaking on behalf of SADC, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Vita Perso, Minister of Human Services and Social Security of Guyana, speaking on behalf of the Caribbean community. Please.
Mr. Chairman, I'm honored to speak today on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean Community CARICOM. I assure you and the members of the Bureau of CARICOM's full support and cooperation in the execution of the Commission's work. The annual session of the Commission on the Status of Women provides us with an opportunity to review progress made in the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and renew our shared commitments to achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. We're now in the decade of action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is imperative that introspection is followed by action. It is a travesty that 25 years after Beijing, no country has achieved gender parity. This year's theme of women's full and effective participation and decision making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence, is timely. Both elements are critical to achieving gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goals. Women are playing an essential role in the socio-economic and political development of the CARICOM region and can be found in leadership positions in every sphere of influence, including politics, public services, business, and in civil society. There is, however, still much work to be done. The UN Secretary General's report, released in 2020, highlights that worldwide women are still underrepresented in public life and decision making. Less than 7% of the heads of state are women, and while the proportion of women in parliament has doubled globally since 1995, men still hold 75% of seats. While not present in large numbers, historically, women in the Caribbean community have been actively involved in politics and have made important contributions to the legislative agendas in their respective countries. They have established themselves as dependable partners in the development process and play a crucial role in promoting sustained and inclusive economic growth and in poverty eradication. They also continue to be influential through their involvement in civil society, women's organizations, as well in other civic engagement, including academia. Through these channels, women have been vocal in advancing the human rights of women and girls and advocating for legislative and policy changes. While women in the region occupy more ministerial posts today, they're still very much outnumbered by men. On average, less than 30% of ministerial portfolios are held by women. Among the primary barriers to women's participation in public and political life are gender stereotypes and cultural and negative social norms. Often, women are judged by different standards than men and are perceived as not being tough enough to be political leaders. In addition, the private lives of women politicians are scrutinized more strictly than their male counterparts. Women in the private sector face similar challenge. Mr. Chairman, there must be an enabling environment for women to achieve full and effective participation and decision making in public life, with men as equal partners. In this regard, we emphasize the importance of family and the need for there to be shared responsibilities and a home environment that gives equal opportunities to boys and girls and that is free from violence. Childcare, education, healthcare, and robust social protection services are essential parts of this equation. The provision of education remains a strong focus in all CARICOM countries. Women and girls are encouraged to pursue their ambitions and their achievements are celebrated. However, while women in the region are more likely than men to have tertiary education, this does not always translate into higher earnings. A recent study suggests that women need to have higher educational levels if they want earnings at the same level as men. Despite higher access to and performance in secondary and tertiary education, they tend to have lower level and lower paying jobs and dedicate 3 times more time to unpaid work than men. In all countries of the region, the employment rate is lower for women, though it should be noted that recent statistics show that women are more likely than men to be employed by government. Mr. Chairman, the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened gender inequalities and increased poverty. Women are disproportionately affected by unemployment, and COVID related restrictions have dramatically increased the unpaid care and domestic burdens of women and girls, reflective of an entrenched gender division of labor. Violence against women and girls has escalated and schools disrupted. Those living in poverty and in rural and indigenous communities are at particular risk of being left behind. In addition to COVID 19, the continuing impacts of climate change provide serious challenges and setbacks for our region, with women and girls being among the most affected populations. Amidst all of this, our women have shown immense fortitude and leadership, contributing in numerous ways towards COVID response and recovery efforts on the front line as healthcare and essential workers and community organizers, as well as some of the most effective national leaders in combating the pandemic. Mr. Chairman, sexual and gender based violence and domestic violence against women and girls continue to be a major challenge for CARICOM member states. Our governments are consistently working to eliminate such violence, ensure access to justice for victims, and support for survivors. Among initiatives is improved data collection aimed at better understanding and addressing the underlying causes of violence. We continue to seek support from our developmental partners for building our capacity to collect credible data and information based on which evidence based policies and action plans can be developed. CARICOM also recognizes the importance of engaging men and boys in efforts to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. We firmly believe that a multifaceted approach that includes measures such as encouraging the equal sharing of responsibilities in areas such as parenting and household work, public awareness campaigns, the engagement of community leaders to address discriminatory social norms and gender stereotypes, as well as a robust legislative regime, can bring about significant changes. Mr. Chairman, we recognize that women's full and effective participation in public life is critical to fulfilling the potentials of our countries and essential to democracy. The member states of CARICOM take this opportunity to reiterate our commitment to ensuring that at national level, all efforts are made to bring about gender equality and the empowerment of our women and girls. Mr. Chairman, in my national capacity, on behalf of Guyana, I emphasize Guyana's commitment and comprehensive drive to eliminate the dark veil of violence which engulfs too many women and girls. Our cohesive multi-sectoral approach includes prevention and intervention strategies, including data collection and analysis to allow for evidence based policy decisions. An aggressive reporting campaign is engendered by our toll free 24-hour hotline, which enables victims of violence, abuse, and trafficking to access immediate help and support services. This is complemented by an app which links victims of violence to help services, vocational training opportunities, and resources to move them from dependence to independence. Mr. Chairman, deep psychological scars of violence haunt survivors. The government of Guyana provides consistent psychosocial support through our Survivors Advocates program, countrywide one stop advocacy centers for children and soon adult survivors consolidate all necessary services under one roof, including reporting and a forensic interview where children tell their story once to all reporting agencies in a protected environment. Three sexual offenses courts and the planned expansion of legal aid services support access to justice for victims of violence from our hinterland to the coastland. Mr. Chairman, women's very survival and their entry into leadership and decision making are hinged on unencumbered access to opportunities for training, resources, sustainable and viable income alternatives, and significant visible national and global platforms. Cognizant of the amplified gender disparity and economic exhaustion of female led households in the COVID stricken world, government has initiated countrywide technical and vocational training, micro enterprise and cottage industry initiatives, creative funding opportunities, and dynamic marketing opportunities specific to women. Soon, we will be launching our first female business incubator. Mr. Chairman, Guyana invests in and includes girls in public life through public speaking engagements and training, exposure to all levels of government, representation at national and international events, and participation in developmental programs reflective of Guyana's commitment to facilitating their empowerment. There is robust conversation and action by government that supports women's inclusion and participation in decision making at all levels in public spheres. 35% of our parliamentarians are women. Mr. Chairman, it is through our consistent global advocacy that barriers limiting women's full and effective participation in public life can be demolished, paving the way for dynamic and successive generations of female leaders across continents. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Human Services and Social Security of Guyana for her statement. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Fernando Elizo Freire, Minister for Sports and Family and Social Inclusion of Cabo Verde, speaking on behalf of community of Portuguese-speaking countries. Please.
Excelências, agradecemos esta oportunidade de podermos estar mais uma vez perante vós, Excelências, a pronunciarmos-nos em nome da comunidade dos países de língua portuguesa, na abertura da Comissão sobre a Situação da Mulher das Nações Unidas, num contexto singular causado pelas limitações decorrentes da pandemia causada pela Covid-19.
It is an honor and privilege to be able to speak at a distinguished forum, even more so in Portuguese, a language that unites more than 260 million people in 4 different continents. For CPLP members, this community has been a privileged forum for sharing experiences and congregation of efforts around the common battles, in particular, the promotion of gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls, particularly in the last year. During the 25 years of existence of this community, the adoption of the Beijing Platform of Actions throughout the Beijing Declaration as one of the guiding documents for the member state actions allowed the adoption of a wide range of recommendations aimed at removing obstacles of the active participation of women in all spheres at all levels of public and private life in order to guarantee their full participation in decision making on political, economical, and social issues. That is, in order to guarantee their empowerment. Reiterating the joint effort that has been made by member states in order to materialize the Beijing recommendation, it is recognized that COVID-19 has become a risk not only for the public health of our population, but also for our economies and social peace, putting at risk the achievement in the empowerment of women, recalling their vulnerability in crisis situations such as the one we currently face. In July 2018, at the 12th Conference of Heads of States and Government, where under the motto People, the Culture, the Oceans, Cabo Verde assumed the pro tempore presidencies of the CPLP. The need for the full implementation of the Beijing Platform for Actions and mainstreaming the gender equality throughout the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted. On the occasion, a resolution was approved on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls of the community of Portuguese-speaking countries, CPLP, where it is recommended in a regular, systematic, and cross-cutting manner the integration of gender equality and empowerment of women and girls dimension in planning, budgeting, drafting, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating legislation and all national policies in member states. At the beginning of November 2019, at the sixth meeting of the ministers and authorities responsible for the gender equality of CPLP, which took place in Praia, in Cabo Verde, the Praia Declaration was drafted and approved, and then the CPLP Action Plan 2017-2020 for gender equality was extended until 2021, a document that brings together the challenges of the community in terms of promoting gender and empowering all women and girls. During this event, the importance of the Memorandum of Understanding between CPLP and UN Women was highlighted, reasserting the political will to keep it active and to promote the multilateral cooperation for gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. The 9 CPLP member states, spread across 4 continents, united beyond the language they speak, are committed to joining efforts to overcome the common barriers that hinders the empowerment of women and girls, as well as all forms of violence against them, in particular female genital mutilation, child marriage, and human trafficking. Excellencies, every year, hundreds, if not thousands, of women and girls are victims of various forms of sexist violence, many of them being extreme victims, meaning murdered. In this sense, the CPLP strengthened its efforts in this fight, declaring in all member states an active fight for the elimination of gender-based violence against women and femicide as a top priority, championing zero tolerance. Taking into account the global context, the member states virtually met on June 29, 2020 to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on gender equality in CPLP, the exchange of experience to avoid setbacks in post-pandemic. A real threat not only for the community, but for all countries in the world. For us, representatives of Portuguese-speaking countries, this is a fight that should unite countries, communities, regions, and the world. And for this reason, we urge you, once again, an effort aimed at combating this pandemic. It's never too much to appeal to us to join the community of Portuguese-speaking countries on this quest that has been going for a quarter of a century in the promotion and protection of human rights of all women and girls, engaging also men and boys in this walk, leaving no one behind. Thank you for your attention.
I thank Minister of Cabo Verde, speaking on behalf of community of Portuguese-speaking countries, for his statement. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency Marcela Guerra Campos, Minister of on the Status of Women of Costa Rica, speaking on behalf of Council of Ministers of Women of Central America and the Dominican Republic. Please.
Muy buen día. Tengo el honor de rendir este posicionamiento en nombre de los países de El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panamá, República Dominicana y mi propio país, Costa Rica, integrantes del Consejo de Ministras de la Mujer de Centroamérica y República Dominicana del Sistema de Integración Centroamericana. El Consejo de Ministras de la Mujer de Centroamérica y República Dominicana, ante el 65º periodo de sesiones de la Comisión de la Condición Jurídica y Social de Costa Rica, reafirma el compromiso de los estados y sus instituciones políticas, sociales y económicas con el desarrollo integral, empoderamiento de las mujeres y su plena y activa participación en los procesos político-electorales y políticos, sociales y económicos, entre otros de los países de la región SICA. En estos momentos que enfrentamos en el mundo los efectos adversos del cambio climático, los efectos sociales y económicos estructurales ocasionados por la pandemia COVID-19, que profundiza la vulnerabilidad económica, particularmente de las mujeres, de las niñas, de los países en desarrollo, es urgente unir esfuerzos para construir sociedades más justas e inclusivas en el mundo actual, en el cual los países nos veamos como hermanos y trabajemos de la mano socialmente por el bien común. La pandemia COVID-19 ha venido a profundizar las ya existentes brechas de desigualdad en el desarrollo de las mujeres, de tal forma que esta ha significado una regresión en los avances de los derechos humanos de las mismas, obtenidos con tanto esfuerzo en el ámbito subregional y nacional. Así lo evidencian los diversos informes y diagnósticos desarrollados tanto en el ámbito nacional como subregional y regional. La pandemia ha ocasionado profundos y diferenciados efectos en la vida de las mujeres, de tal forma que ha puesto de manifiesto una vez más la fragilidad de su empoderamiento económico por caída de sus ingresos, debido a que la mayor parte de los mismos dependen de la economía informal y el sector de servicios, especialmente los servicios domésticos, seriamente limitados por la falta de movilidad, principalmente en aquellos países donde se toman medidas de confinamiento, lo que consecuentemente generó la pérdida de sus ingresos reales al mismo tiempo que aumentó su carga de cuidado doméstico en sus hogares a personas afectadas por la pandemia COVID-19. Esta nueva realidad ha producido una sobrecarga de trabajo en el hogar para la mujer, atendiendo el trabajo productivo y de cuidado de manera simultánea. En el caso del trabajo productivo, las mujeres continúan ejerciendo su rol central en la producción, abastecimiento y comercialización de alimentos, debido a que ellas siguen aportando a sus economías familiares como asalariadas por cuenta propia, a fin de responder a la demanda de alimentos en las economías de sus familias, comunidades, países de la región. A ello se suma el trabajo de cuidado, el cual incluye la atención a personas adultas mayores, personas enfermas, hijos e hijas, menores a su cargo, personas con discapacidad. En este caso, con el cierre temporal de los centros educativos, las mujeres se vieron forzadas a complementar el trabajo de las y los docentes, lo que se suma a otras tareas de cuidado cotidianas y a la responsabilidad de implementar medidas necesarias de higiene para prevenir el contagio y cuidar su salud y la de su familia. Esto ha constituido un aumento desmedido del trabajo de las mujeres en detrimento de su calidad de vida y su salud integral. Vemos con preocupación el incremento de la violencia física, sexual, psicológica contra las mujeres, presente de forma permanente en sus vidas, conllevando una de las consecuencias y más graves y el incremento de embarazos en niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes, por lo tanto, en las tasas de natalidad. Esta afectación se podrá ver reflejada también en el abandono escolar, dando continuidad a los ciclos intergeneracionales de pobreza. Para el CONCA es claro que la pandemia ha hecho más que evidente la relación entre el desarrollo integral y el empoderamiento de la mujer. El empoderamiento de las mujeres se impulsa por varias vías, iniciando por una formación educativa libre de sexismo, racismo y discriminación, ya que a mayor nivel educativo, mayores competencias y por medio de estas, más y mejores oportunidades laborales y profesionales. Esto a su vez tiene una incidencia en mejores salarios, mayor reconocimiento social, desarrollo de su autonomía e independencia económica y por ende mejores condiciones de vida. Es por ello que el COMCA-SICA, en coordinación con la Comisión de Educación y Cultura de Centroamérica, órgano regional del SICA que aglutina ministras y ministros de Educación y Cultura de nuestra región, están realizando esfuerzos desde el año pasado para integrar al quehacer de los Ministerios de Educación y Cultura un programa formativo sobre los derechos humanos de las niñas y las mujeres para los niveles de preprimaria, primaria, que por un lado informe y forme a las niñas y adolescentes sobre sus derechos y por otro lado informe y forme a los niños en el reconocimiento, observancia y aplicación de los derechos de las niñas. Y finalmente promueva en los cuerpos docentes y autoridades educativas la aplicación y ejercicio de los derechos humanos de las niñas ante toda la sociedad e instituciones. Este programa será fundamental para contribuir a eliminar la cultura de desigualdad de las niñas y trascender el modelo sexista de relaciones sociales que potencia y legitima la violencia contra las mujeres. En el marco del 65º periodo de sesiones de la Comisión de la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer, instamos a las instituciones regionales y nacionales, a las organizaciones, a los movimientos sociales, empresariales, a los partidos políticos, a la cooperación para el desarrollo de los países de la región SICA y a la comunidad internacional en general a que dé prioridad al reconocimiento, observancia, aplicación y ejercicio de derechos humanos de las mujeres en todas las políticas, planes, estrategias, programas y proyectos dirigidos a promover y garantizar la reactivación económica, social, ambiental y de seguridad post-COVID. Somos la fuerza de la reactivación. Sobre nuestros hombros recayeron las acciones de cuidado en el momento de confinamiento. Desde este punto de vista, el propósito de que se integre a todas y cada una de las mujeres bajo el principio de equidad, complementariedad para el avance hacia la igualdad de las mujeres y el cumplimiento de los derechos humanos es vital en esta nueva etapa. Alentamos a los estados en todos sus niveles a redoblar sus esfuerzos por sostener y avanzar en la agenda de compromisos por los derechos de las mujeres y que en el marco de las acciones por la recuperación post-pandemia se garantice la participación de todas las mujeres y la adopción de decisiones para ellas de forma plena y efectiva. Asimismo, instamos a que se tomen medidas orientadas a la prevención, atención de violencia contra las mujeres en el marco de la nueva normalidad y se avance en la incorporación de las políticas para el cuidado de las personas dependientes y la promoción de la corresponsabilidad de los cuidados. Las ministras del CONCA, conscientes de los datos científicos del panel intergubernamental del cambio climático, que han demostrado que Centroamérica es una de las regiones más vulnerables del planeta ante los efectos adversos del cambio climático, lo que profundiza nuestra vulnerabilidad en la población en general y en particular de las mujeres y de las niñas, por lo cual Centroamérica debe ser reconocida como una zona altamente vulnerable ante el cambio climático y que bajo el principio de justicia climática se reconozcan los daños y las pérdidas, a fin que los países significativamente que han aportado a las causas del recalentamiento global contribuyan de manera directa a indemnizar y reparar los daños, con el objetivo de restituir a las mujeres y a las niñas de nuestra región sus derechos a mejoras de condición de vida, reducir la brecha de género y reducir la pobreza. El CONCA reitera su responsabilidad, compromiso con la eliminación de la discriminación contra las mujeres en todas sus formas, así como la prevención, sanción.
I thank Minister on the Status of Women of Costa Rica for her statement, and now I give the floor to Her Excellency Tanzila Narbaeva, Chairperson of the Senate of Uzbekistan, speaking on behalf of the group of Central Asian countries. Please.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, участники сессии, прежде всего позвольте поблагодарить и выразить признательность за предоставленную возможность выступить от имени диалога женщин-лидеров стран Центральной Азии. Глобальная пандемия показала жизненную необходимость многостороннего партнерства по вопросам женщин. В этом контексте образование диалога женщин-лидеров стран Центральной Азии стало историческим событием и позитивным примером взаимодействия между странами нашего региона. Особо хотела бы отметить, что цели нашего объединения тесно связаны с приоритетами Комиссии ООН по положению женщин. Сегодня государства Центральной Азии добились больших успехов в защите прав, свобод и интересов женщин, недопущения насилия и дискриминации в отношении женщин, обеспечения их участия в процессах принятия решений. Это все на основе принципов инклюзивности. В наших странах в результате коренных реформ и преобразований в области обеспечения гендерного равенства накоплен необходимый опыт и практика, создаются благоприятные условия для полноценного и равноправного участия женщин в общественной, политической, экономической жизни стран. Хотела бы отметить, что в регионе за последние 20 лет доля женщин в национальных парламентах удвоилась. Страны региона постепенно продвигаются к достижению целей Пекинской декларации и платформы действий, предусматривающих предоставление женщинам и мужчинам равных условий во всех сферах жизнедеятельности государств. В этих целях диалог женщин-лидеров стран Центральной Азии твердо намерен продолжить усилия по всесторонней поддержке женщин для повышения их роли в процессах принятия решений, а также достижения гендерного равенства среди лидеров в странах региона. Нами будут предприняты меры по дальнейшей социальной защите уязвимых слоев населения и повышению уровня жизни бедных слоев женского населения, особенно в период пандемии. В ходе проведенных в декабре прошлого года и феврале 2021 года встреч и бесед участницы диалога обсудили положение дел в странах Центральной Азии, совместно со структурой ООН «Женщины» разработали и передали соответствующие предложения и рекомендации для включения в итоговый документ 65-й сессии Комиссии ООН по положению женщин. В рекомендациях уделено особое внимание на важность совместной работы по совершенствованию законодательства в сферах защиты прав, свобод и интересов женщин, обеспечения равенства женщин и мужчин, полного и эффективного участия женщин в процессах принятия решений, а также искоренения насилия и дискриминации. В рамках диалога будут продолжены меры по созданию необходимых условий для повышения активности женщин, содействию их занятости, расширению экономических прав, в том числе путем обеспечения женщинам доступа к технологиям и финансовым ресурсам, внедрение гендерного бюджетирования. В центре внимания женщин-лидеров стран региона будут находиться вопросы оказания материальной и финансовой помощи, принятия эффективных мер по ликвидации всех форм насилия в отношении женщин и оказанию помощи жертвам. В соответствии с планом действий диалога женщин-лидеров в период председательства Узбекистана в 2021 году, среди прочих мероприятий предусмотрено проведение региональных круглого стола, бизнес-форума и конференции, которые будут посвящены вопросам гендерного равенства, организации регионального лагеря молодежи по вопросам лидерства и наставничества. Пользуясь случаем, хочу пригласить вас всех для участия в этих мероприятиях. Уверена, что запуск нашего диалога позволит объединить усилия стран региона в выполнении задач Комиссии ООН по положению женщин, и его работа придаст новую динамику региональному сотрудничеству в сфере защиты прав, свобод и интересов женщин. Диалог позволит повысить потенциал женщин-лидеров в дальнейшей реализации задач ООН, связанных с обеспечением регионального мира и безопасности, достижением цели устойчивого развития в регионе на самом высоком уровне. Уважаемые дамы и господа, теперь хотелось бы поделиться видением Узбекистана в отношении обсуждаемых сегодня вопросов. Первое. Вопросы гендерного равенства должны оставаться в центре внимания государства и общества. В этой связи считаем целесообразным активно продвигать на глобальном уровне принцип «права женщины являются правами человека». Всесторонняя поддержка женщин и девушек является одним из приоритетов государственной политики нашей страны. Создана вертикальная система реализации задач по дальнейшему повышению социального статуса и расширению участия женщин в управлении делами государства и общества, в том числе в проводимых широкомасштабных реформах вплоть до уровня махаллей. Эффективно функционирует комиссия по обеспечению гендерного равенства. В Сенате Али-Маджлиса Республики Узбекистан действует комитет по вопросам женщин и обеспечению гендерного равенства. Создан Республиканский общественный совет женщин. Второе. Необходимо формирование законодательства прямого действия по обеспечению равенства мужчин и женщин, защиты прав, свобод и интересов женщин. В Узбекистане за последние 4 года на основе международных стандартов принято более 20 нормативно-правовых актов, касающихся интересов женщин. Разработана стратегия гендерного равенства до 2030 года. Введена обязательная гендерно-правовая экспертиза принимаемых всех нормативно-правовых актов. Третье. Важно создать все необходимые условия для повышения социально-экономической и политико-правовой активности женщин, их участие в работе общественных и политических организаций. В Узбекистане все больше усиливается роль женщин в государственной и общественной жизни нашей страны. Сформирован солидный кадровый резерв активных женщин для работы в государственных структурах. В этом вопросе мы обращаем внимание на принятие эффективных мер по развитию ведущей роли женщин на местном уровне. Представленность женщин на ответственных и руководящих должностях на сегодняшний день достигла более 26%. Количество женщин в новом парламенте увеличилось более чем в 2 раза. По этому показателю парламент Узбекистана занимает 37 место среди 190 законодательных органов стран мира. Четвертое. Следует обращать особое внимание на обеспечение занятости женщин, поддержку женского предпринимательства, подготовку и переподготовку специалистов. В Узбекистане в каждом регионе созданы центры женского предпринимательства. В 2020 году число женщин-предпринимателей увеличилось до 172 тысяч человек. В рамках недавно созданного фонда для поддержки женщин с уставным капиталом 96 миллионов долларов США запущена программа безвозмездного кредитования женщин-предпринимателей. Пятое. Целесообразно создание необходимых условий для доступа к образованию и здравоохранению. Из 100% обучающихся в школах детей 50% составляют девочки. В вузах Республики Узбекистан 46% составляют девушки. В 2020 году 950 малообеспеченным девушкам выделены гранты на обучение в узбекских высших учебных заведениях, а в 2021 году такие гранты будут выделены 2000 девушкам. 150 нуждающимся девушкам из каждого региона, не имеющим родителей или одного из родителей, контракт будет оплачиваться за счет государственного бюджета. Принимаются беспрецедентные меры по предоставлению медицинских услуг нашим женщинам. В 2021 году в нашей стране будет проведено углубленное медицинское обследование почти 9 миллионов женщин, включая онкологический скрининг. Для профилактики онкологических заболеваний 323 тысячам девочкам будут обеспечены вакцинацией от вируса папилломы человека. Шестое направление. Необходимо проводить усиленную политику социальной защиты женщин. В нашей стране оказывается адресная работа по социальной поддержке, профессиональному обучению и трудоустройству женщин. Для этого в конце 2020 года введена система регистрации нуждающихся, женские тетради. За короткий период оказана материальная помощь 13,5 тысячам женщинам. 1,2 тысячи женщин получили льготные кредиты. 41 тысяч женщин были трудоустроены. Введена система обеспечения уязвимых слоев женского населения доступным жильем на льготной основе. Седьмое направление. Важно продолжить меры по ликвидации насилия в отношении женщин. В Узбекистане созданы и функционируют реабилитационные центры, шелтеры, выдаются охранные ордера пострадавшим от насилия женщинам. Созданы каналы в социальных сетях и горячие телефонные линии для жертв домашнего насилия. Восьмое направление. Нужно усилить роль институтов гражданского общества в обеспечении защиты прав женщин. В нашей стране действует более 10 тысяч неправительственных организаций, из которых деятельность более 400 направлена на поддержку женщин. Уважаемые участники мероприятия, я хотела бы подчеркнуть, что мы и в дальнейшем продолжим выполнять взятые на себя обязательства по Пекинской платформе действий и целям в области устойчивого развития. Надеюсь, что по итогам 65-й сессии Комиссии ООН по положению женщин будут разработаны полезные для всех нас рекомендации. Благодарю за внимание.
I thank the chairperson of the Senate of Uzbekistan for her statement, and now I give the floor to His Excellency Samuelo Lalonio, Permanent Representative of Tuvalu to the United Nations, speaking on behalf of Pacific Islands Forum. Please.
Honorable Chair, Excellencies, Talofa and warm greetings from the Blue Pacific. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Pacific Islands Forum, a regional bloc of 18 Pacific countries and territories, including my country, Tuvalu. This year's priority theme is timely as women's participation and decision-making in public life remain low, including in the Blue Pacific. We recognize that advancing women in leadership and decision-making extends beyond attempts to elect women to local and national governments. It is also about shared decision-making, and leadership in households and in communities. The threats brought on by COVID-19 require renewed attention and collaboration to significantly increase women's participation in decision-making. Women have a wealth of knowledge and skills to share. It is our individual and collective responsibility to provide the enabling environment. The Pacific has a proud history of harnessing regionalism to address common issues. We invoked the Bikatawa Declaration to establish the Pacific Humanitarian Pathway on COVID-19 to address the impact of the pandemic and facilitate the transportation of critical medical and humanitarian supplies across the Pacific to assist our people. This confirms that we must draw on our collective strength to ensure that challenges we face do not become insurmountable. Our Pacific leaders remain committed to realizing gender equality, demonstrated through the 2012 Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration and the integration of gender commitments across regional and national frameworks. These lift the status of and empower women and girls in our Blue Pacific to realize their human rights by actively participating in economic, political, and social life. Most Pacific governments have enacted laws and policies to provide compulsory education at both primary and secondary levels, resulting in most countries achieving gender parity in primary enrollment, while secondary enrollment shows girls outnumbering boys. Several Pacific countries have developed innovative approaches to reducing rates of gender-based violence. First, we have Australia and Fiji are in the process of developing and implementing national action plans to end violence against women and girls, which focuses on primary prevention of violence. The Solomon Islands has developed a progressive domestic violence counseling guideline, the first in the Pacific, and that all forum countries now have legislations or pending laws that provide protection for women from gender-based violence, criminalizing domestic violence against women, and recognizing marital rape as a crime. Climate change remains the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security, and well-being of Pacific people. We are seeing increasing engagement between national women's structures and government agencies mandated for climate change, disaster risk responses, and management in the Pacific. This is testament to women's voice, skills, and experiences as vital to climate change action and disaster risk preparedness and response efforts. Honorable Chairperson, despite this progress, there remains a significant gap between men and women's participation in leadership, decision-making, and in most aspects of life. The fulfillment of our commitment to the Beijing Platform for Action remains a challenge. The Pacific acknowledges the UN Secretary General's report on this year's priority theme, recognizing that women's representation in Parliament in the Pacific is low, on average holding only 8.8% of seats, and in free countries there are no women in Parliament. Pacific women's full and effective participation in public life remains limited. While there are no legal impediments to women contesting elections, social barriers are a reality, particularly negative perceptions of women in politics and public life. While Pacific women and girls from diverse backgrounds and abilities have proven their capacity in leadership and decision-making in all sectors, we must continue to empower them so they equally participate in, contribute, and benefit from development outcomes. The vulnerabilities of our communities and our women and girls are further intensified within a multi-hazard environment as faced by the Pacific, with the climate change crisis and natural disasters further exacerbated by COVID-19. The effects of the climate crisis on Pacific women and girls are significant. We need to support and uphold their resilience to climate change and natural disasters by using their knowledge and skills to strengthen climate resilience and mitigation initiatives, and gender responsive and disability inclusive social protection systems and climate resilience infrastructure. Our Pacific leaders recognize that women's leadership plays a critical role in the response to COVID-19 and future pandemics and crises. Women's leadership in all aspects of the recovery process is critical as our Pacific countries reopen borders, begin or complete vaccinations, build economies, and strengthen interventions for heightened resilience. Gender inequality increases vulnerability to any global crisis. It is critical that in the remaining decade of the 2030 Agenda, the global community commit and accelerate the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, the SDGs, and actions that address root causes that further perpetuate gender inequality. Violence against women and girls is an issue magnified by COVID-19, with severe and disproportionate impact on women and girls, including increasing economic insecurity, rising levels of gender-based violence, and the continued inaccessibility to essential health education, justice, police, and other social services. The Pacific region remains resolute to realize gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. We need to be part of the solution and welcome partnerships with nations and organizations to realize gender equality and empowerment of all our women and girls. Honorable Chairperson, in a constantly changing world, I urge the international community not to lose sight of the compounding and intersecting barriers on women and girls' full and effective participation to address issues such as climate change, natural disasters, COVID-19, harmful social norms, gender-based violence, and conflicts. Women's representation and effective participation at all levels of decision-making is central to achieving gender equality. We must accelerate actions, break down barriers, and eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. Only then will we realize our Pacific leaders' vision for gender equality and the strategic intent of the Beijing Platform for Action and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Honorable Chairperson, we therefore call for the continued support from the international community and development partners in accelerating women's full and effective participation in decision-making and public life, and the elimination of all forms of violence against all women and girls. We also call for ambitious climate change actions now through decisive and transformative actions, including in UNFCCC platforms, to secure our children's future. COVID-19 recovery is an opportunity to reset our global development agenda to one that is climate smart, gender inclusive, and leaves no one behind. The climate change crisis exacerbates impacts on women and girls. And we also call that global recovery efforts on humanitarian disasters and pandemics through greater participation of women to support disaster risk reduction and develop climate resilience, build health infrastructure and social services, and protection systems that render inclusive access for all women and girls. Honorable Chair, we must continue to combat challenges together for a better present and a greater future, especially for our women and girls. The onus is on us to ensure that in the remaining years to 2030, decisive action is taken to realize gender equality and the empowerment of women. Honorable Chair, I thank you for the opportunity.
I thank the permanent representative of Tuvalu for his statement. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Magjan Ilyasov, permanent representative of Kazakhstan to the United Nations, speaking on behalf of a group of landlocked developing countries. Please.
Mr. Chair, Madam Executive Director, Excellencies, distinguished participants. It is my great honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 32 states of the group of the landlocked developing countries and the 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. This Commission's theme is of critical importance for the LLDCs as they are committed to ensuring the full and active engagement of women with optimal opportunities for the decision-making in the political, economic, and social life of their countries. These, together with the elimination of violence against women and girls, are high priorities in our national agendas. Gender parity has thus gained increasing significance in the LLDCs during the unprecedented and uncertain times of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to highlight the following key issues for your consideration. First, the impact of COVID-19. Second, challenges faced by women and girls of the LLDCs on the ground. Third, efforts made by the LLDCs for gender empowerment and participation, and assistance sought from the Commission and the international community. And finally, fourth, our commitment for the way forward. First, let me spell out the downward economic and social spiral and corresponding disequilibrium in the aftermath of COVID-19. Our societies and economies, which are structurally and traditionally built to rely on women as health workers and caregivers on all the front lines and at home, have received a great shock. We are unable to fully withstand the high toll on women the pandemic has inflicted with its severe physical, economic, and psychological impacts and trauma. The virus has also simultaneously exposed the structural inequalities across every sphere from health, economy, security to social protection, and have shaken the foundation of the society. The consequences of present-day crisis are never gender neutral, and COVID-19 is no exception. International assessments show that the pandemic will drive more than 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2021, this year, with almost half of them being women and girls. This will bring their total number to as many as 435 million, living on less than $2 per month. In 2021, it is expected that 118 women aged 25 to 34 will live in extreme poverty globally for every 100 men in the same age group. This ratio could rise to 121 poor women for every 100 poor men by 2030 and will be stark and sharply escalated in the LLDCs. Secondly, we need to be aware that women of this group live daily with numerous and complex challenges in reaching equitable empowerment. The 32 LLDCs, with their more than 520 million people, are one of the most vulnerable populations in the world, characterized by extreme poverty, weak economies, and lack of human and institutional capacities for growth and development. Women's participation in the labor force is low and therefore contribute minimally to the national income. Most of them are overrepresented in the informal economy, which has collapsed with no safety nets. Many women die in childbirth, receive less years of schooling, and face greater malnutrition, food and water insecurity than men. They also hold fewer seats in legislature. Many more women have turned into refugees and migrants, living in helpless conditions with bleak future. Violence against women is also rampant because of harmful discriminatory practices. Our countries are further disadvantaged by geographic limitations and harsh weather and climate change effects, which severely hamper the efforts of women to break out of the poverty trap. In addition, our women and girls suffer a grossly unequal burden of deprivation and disinstitution as they lack access to and ownership of land as well as productive resources in the rural areas. All of this heighten gender inequality, which hinders the overall development of the LLDCs. Thirdly, despite all the efforts towards gender parity for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the LLDCs have a long way to go. Many of the LLDCs have made worthwhile strides with numerous notable legal changes in protecting and upholding the rights of women, and measures paving the way for the leadership and entrepreneurial opportunities. There have been measures to bring a positive shift in societal attitudes towards women and girls. Although we adhere to the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, national reports of the LDCs on its implementations indicate that women still continue to suffer discrimination and injustice. They are excluded to various extents from full participation on equal terms with men due to structural, economic, and social factors. I would like to underscore that most countries have implemented effective social protection schemes and policies, along with the government spending on key services with gender-oriented budgets. However, In many LDCs, efficient social protection systems remain limited in coverage and will need significant upgrading and wider outreach to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, the LDCs face financial constraints in funding effective stimulus measures for the most vulnerable segments of their population, especially for low-income and unemployed women. Resources are required for integrating women into the agricultural, trade, commercial, and scientific and communication sectors for the economic relief of LDCs. In light of heavy outlays on emergency and relief measures, allocations are limited for opportunities for the full development and capacity building of women. Fourthly, we recognize and thank the international community for its assistance in achieving the targets set for gender equality and appeal for further future support. We especially acknowledge the efforts of the UN Women and other international agencies, as well as the European Union, to give priority to the LDCs and their Spotlight initiative. With our increasing shortfall in resources, we urge for greater funding from donor countries for gender-oriented programs to eliminate violence against women, empower their economic production, improve access to assets, reduce poverty, and enhance stewardship and managing skills. Additional funding is needed to bridge the gender pay gap, increase job opportunities, access to loans with technical assistance to enhance new anti-discriminatory legislation. Simultaneously, much needed in this context is technical assistance in the collection and analysis of gender-segregated statistical data, as well as to elaborate on gender-sensitive targets and indicators to implement the outcomes of the major UN global conferences from the gender perspective. In the political declaration of the midterm review of the Vienna Programme of Actions for LDCs, the international community had committed itself to take targeted and accelerated action to remove all legal, social, and economic barriers to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. It was also determined to ensure that women and girls should realize and enjoy their human rights. All of the above call for greater outlays for women in the LDCs in all UN programs and policies, with the full engagement of women and girls if we, together with LDCs and SEEDs, have to meet the benchmarks of Agenda 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to underscore that the LDCs, together with the UN system, international partners, donors, civil society, women activists, and youth groups, will strive for political, economic, and social justice and equality for women on the basic tenet that women's rights are also human rights. They are the path to society's progress. Indeed, human rights was a top priority of people voiced around the world in the 2020 UN survey. For the LDCs, investing in women's political, economic, and social empowerment is integral to achieving all the 17 SDGs. For us, the SDGs should not be a set of empty promises. They are inviolable vows. The LDCs will work towards equalitarian regional and global development with women as the key drivers and architects of progress of our new future. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Kazakhstan for his statement. Now the Commission will hear a joint statement on behalf of Group of Friends of the Elimination of Violence Against Women by Her Excellency Elizabeth Gomez Acorda, Minister of Women, Genders and Diversity of Argentina, Her Excellency Doreen Sioka, Minister of Gender of Namibia, and Her Excellency Jutta Urpilainen, European Commissioner for International Partnerships.
Chair, representatives of governments and civil society, ladies and gentlemen. Together with my colleagues from Argentina and Namibia, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 91 members of the cross-regional group of friends for the elimination of violence against women and girls. The group of friends was established in December 2020 to promote the implementation of the UN Secretary General's calls on gender-based violence and COVID-19 and to support global initiatives aimed at eliminating gender-based violence, such as Spotlight. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit globally, increasing gender stereotypes and negative social norms. This came with regressive consequences for gender equality. We have seen a significant rise of the unpaid care work, a spike in sexual and gender-based violence, including intimate partner violence, and the loss of income and livelihood for women. 243 million women and girls aged 15 to 49 have been subjected to sexual and/or physical violence perpetrated by an intimate partner in the previous 12 months. With only 7% of the world's heads of government being women, the majority of women and girls are unable to see themselves and their lived experiences reflected in their leaders. Research shows that debunking negative social norms and stereotypes plays a critical role in preventing violence against women and girls. Recent figures are alarming. 81.8% of women parliamentarians have experienced psychological violence, including threats of death, rape, beating, or kidnapping. Sexual and gender-based violence limits women's ability to exercise their equal right to participate, including holding public office and corporate leadership roles. As we prepare to build back better and more equal, we must ensure that women and girls facing violence and discrimination partake in all response and recovery efforts and at all levels. Adolescent girls also face particular threats to their safety and their futures as a result of COVID-19, including the increasing harmful practices such as child early forced marriage, female genital mutilation, and the violation of the right to education. Women must be full and active participants in all decisions that affect them, both as individuals and at the societal level.
The group of friends would like to highlight 5 priorities. First, we reaffirm the need to ensure respect for and compliance with all international obligations and commitments on gender equality, the empowerment of all women and girls, and the realization of all their human rights. Second, we reset the centrality of women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in decision-making across all spheres and at all levels to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, to eliminate discrimination against women in political and public lives, to build a more equitable, resilient world free from violence. We recognize the interlinkage between gender equality, participation, and the economic empowerment of all women and girls, and we emphasize the need to eradicate poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including by removing all barriers to women's decision-making roles in all sectors. Girls and young women are integral agents of change and underrepresented in decision-making. The group of friends promotes their safe and meaningful participation, including through enhanced cooperation with child, adolescent, and youth organizations by enabling their participation in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies, programs, and initiatives. We must also give special attention to women and girls in vulnerable, conflict-affected, and marginalized situations, including those with disability. Third, it is essential to scale up the implementation of evidence-informed strategies and the programs across multiple sectors to prevent and eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. We must invest more in quality education. Strong education system have the transformative potential to shift harmful social norms and support health relationship from a young age and empower adolescent girls and boys is key to tackle the root causes of violence and increase economic opportunities for women. We must ensure quality and affordable access to health and social services for women and girls, which are essential for the realization of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. This is a life or death issue, not a matter of ideological debates. We will continue to support, promote, and protect universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. In accordance with the programs of action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the Beijing Platform for Action and the outcome documents of their review conferences.
Debemos crear sistemas de justicia con perspectiva de género. Esto implica reformar los sistemas legales y judiciales para garantizar mecanismos de denuncias accesibles para las víctimas y sobrevivientes y equiparar mejor a las instituciones para abordar la violencia sexual y de género, incluso a través de capacitaciones específicas. Debemos fortalecer la seguridad de género y cibernética y detener la violencia y el acoso en línea, apoyando el trabajo y la independencia de las trabajadoras de los medios de comunicación, eliminando los estereotipos de género en el contenido de los medios y alentando al sector privado y los medios de comunicación a establecer pautas y estándares para mejorar el respeto por la dignidad de mujeres y niñas. Al hacerlo, se necesitan esfuerzos específicos para abordar la violencia sexual y de género en situaciones de conflicto y emergencias humanitarias a través de la implementación y la financiación de la Agenda de Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad. Nuestra cuarta prioridad es mejorar la disponibilidad de datos y recursos vinculados a cuestiones de género que sean comparables y confiables. Necesitamos más esfuerzos para movilizar los recursos necesarios para promover el liderazgo y la participación de las mujeres en la vida pública.
the existing arrangements to protect their human rights are insufficient given the gaps in the international legal framework. A comprehensive and integrated national legal document is needed to promote the rights and dignity of older persons. The Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging has positive implications for the enjoyment of human rights for older persons, but uneven progress with regard to its implementation and gaps between policy and practice remain major constraints. Moreover, while the Madrid Plan of Action contains a number of references to human rights, it is not a human rights instrument and has not been designed to comprehensively address existing protection gaps. Therefore, it is not sufficient to ensure the full enjoyment of the human rights by older persons. Mr. Chairperson, to achieve gender equality, we need full, equal, and meaningful participation of all women at all ages in public life and decision-making, including, of course, older women who continue to face discrimination and exclusion from public life. Ageism should be a key societal concern at the global level, but despite the need for targeted evidence-based measures to tackle ageism or all age stereotypes, negative attitudes and prejudice against older persons are not currently considered in data sets. In this regard, we look forward to the forthcoming report of the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons, Ms. Claudia Mahler, on ageism and age discrimination, and on the human rights of older women. We are confident that the reports from the independent expert will provide important data and insights as we look to advance the protection of the human rights of older persons. We would also like to take this opportunity to express our appreciation for the preparation of her report on the impact of the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons contained in document A75/205. In addition, our gratitude goes to the Secretary General of the UN for the preparation of the policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons. In this context, we also welcome the adoption of Resolution 74-274 on international cooperation to ensure global access to medicines, vaccines, and medical equipment to face COVID-19, which has facilitated the work of the UN system in its coordinated response to the pandemic and could greatly benefit the health of older persons, including older women. The pandemic disproportionately affected older persons, making them one of the most vulnerable groups. According to the Secretary General policy brief, with lockdowns and reduced care, violence against older persons is on the rise, especially that against older women who depend on family members for their daily survival, making them one more vulnerable to this type of abuse. The group of friends expresses its concern about the fact that older persons may be left behind without an adequate support from their families, and even without adequate financial resources. Older women particularly face economic vulnerability, especially when their role is restricted to unpaid care and domestic work, and they are dependent on others for their support and survival. It is undeniable that older persons can make a significant contribution to the social, economic, and sustainable development of their societies if an enabling environment and adequate guarantees are in place. These include investing in closing the digital divide, lifelong education, digital literacy, and digital skills in order to foster the social inclusion of older persons. In that sense, it's imperative to empower older persons and allow them to effectively make that contribution, becoming not only recipients of special care and social protection, but also specific right holders and active agents and beneficiaries of change. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, gender equality and the empowerment and human rights of all women and girls of all ages are essential for the full, effective, and accelerated implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action of the 2030 Agenda for SDGs, and also the International Conference on Population and Development Program of Action. Promote and protect the rights of older women by ensuring their equal access to social, legal, and financial services infrastructure, healthcare, social protection, and economic resources, and their full and equal participation in decision-making are required in order to leave no woman or girl behind. In this regard, the group of Friends of Older Persons stands ready to engage in substantive discussion with the rest of the membership to discuss and work together to take measures in order to address the challenges and deliver on the opportunities to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls throughout their life course. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson.
I thank the permanent representative of Chile for his statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Duško Uzunovsky, Chargé d'Affaires of North Macedonia, to speak on behalf of LGBTI core group. Please.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished participants, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the LGBTI core group. The LGBTI core group is an informal cross-regional group established in 2008. The group is co-chaired by Argentina and the Netherlands, also includes Albania, Australia, Bolivia, Brazil, Cabo Verde, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Ecuador, El Salvador, France, Germany, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, Malta, Montenegro, Mexico, Nepal, New Zealand, North Macedonia, Norway, Spain, Sweden, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the United States of America, Uruguay, the European Union, as well as the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the non-governmental organization Human Rights Watch and Outright Action International. Mr. Chairman, the Commission on the Status of Women is the principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to promoting of gender equality and the empowerment of all women. This year's theme, women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, is an opportunity to highlight the importance of including LGBTI persons in this discussion to ensure that no one is left behind. Women and girls in all their diversity need to be given equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. As the Secretary General mentioned in his report, gender equality cannot be achieved unless public life and decision-making includes women and girls in all their diversity. However, the report highlights that lesbian, bisexual, and intersex women and transgender persons continue to face discrimination and exclusion from public life. Moreover, the Secretary General states that women and girls who face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, including due to their sexual orientation and gender identity, are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, creating even more significant disparities. The Secretary General highlighted again this year that gender-based violence remains pervasive, with lesbian, bisexual, intersex women, and transgender persons worldwide at heightened risk of violence and harassment. They face specific challenges to access decision-making processes due to the violence and discrimination they suffer. Laws that still criminalize sexual orientation and gender identity prevent the full, equal, effective, and meaningful participation of LGBTI persons in public life across the globe. Human rights mechanisms have repeatedly emphasized links between criminalization of sexual orientation and gender identity and the constraints that criminalization put on the work of human rights defenders. These laws instill fear of prosecution, persecution, and violence and often silence LGBTI persons, excluding them from any form of participation. Violence against LGBTI persons can be physical, psychological, or sexual. It can include domestic violence, acid attacks, forcible impregnation, rape as a tool in so-called conversion therapies, institutionalization in psychiatric facilities, hate crimes, extrajudicial execution, torture, and enforced disappearances. Lesbian, bisexual, and intersex women and transgender persons who suffer multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination are at higher risk of suffering sexual and gender-based violence. LGBTI human rights defenders are especially at risk, as they suffer a specific kind of violence due to their intersection and the shrinking space during the pandemic. The absence of lesbian, bisexual, and intersex women and transgender persons in decision-making often results in public policies and laws that do not address their specific needs that could exacerbate discrimination against them. In contrast, when lesbian, bisexual, and intersex women and transgender persons are included in public life, there is a decline in prejudice and stereotyping, and policies start to take effect that concerns the exercise of their rights. The core group believes that full, equal, effective, and meaningful participation of LGBTI persons in all spheres of public life is essential to achieving gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Mr. Chairman, we welcome the Secretary General's report and the inclusion of lesbian, bisexual, and intersex women and transgender persons in all spheres of public life. We express our concern that lesbian, bisexual, and intersex women and transgender persons in every region of the world continue to be subjected to or are at risk of daily sexual and gender-based violence, discrimination, and marginalization based on their real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or sex characteristics. We also express concern that violence and discrimination cause LGBTI persons to be excluded and left behind in the full, equal, effective, and meaningful participation in all spheres of public life. The LGBTI core group reiterates that the fulfillment of the Beijing Declaration and the 2030 Agenda requires that violence, discrimination, and political, social, and economic exclusion of any individual or group must end. We call on those gathered here at the 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women to join us in committing to include women and girls in all their diversity in all spheres of public life and all aspects of decision-making. Our commitment to leave no one behind demands it. I thank you.
I thank the Chargé d'Affaires of North Macedonia for his statement. Now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Her Excellency Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States of America. Please.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Chairperson of the Commission, Madam Executive Director, distinguished ministers, excellencies, civil society members, it is an honor to address this esteemed commission. Since 1947, this commission has documented the realities women face, shaped global standards on women's rights, and stood for gender equality. That work is as urgent now as it was at the start. On behalf of the United States, thank you. This year, in considering the status of women, especially as it pertains to the participation of women in decision-making, we must also consider the status of democracy. At its best, democracy protects human rights, promotes human dignity, and upholds the rule of law. It is a means to establish peace and shared prosperity. It should ensure every citizen, regardless of gender, has an equal voice, and free and fair elections that will respect the will of the people. At the same time, democracy requires constant vigilance, constant improvement. It is a work in progress. And today we know that democracy is increasingly under great strain. For 15 consecutive years, we have seen a troubling decline in freedom around the globe. In fact, experts believe that this past year was the worst on record for the global deterioration of democracy and freedom. So even as we confront a global health crisis, an economic crisis, it is critical that we continue to defend democracy. To that end, the United States is strengthening our engagement with the United Nations and the broader multilateral system. We are also rejoining the Human Rights Council because we know the status of democracy depends on our collective commitment to those values articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The status of democracy also depends fundamentally on the empowerment of women, not only because the exclusion of women in decision-making is a marker of a flawed democracy, but because the participation of women strengthens democracy. And that's true everywhere. Looking around the world, I am inspired by the progress that is being made. And I am proud to report that while the United States still has work to do, we too are making progress, and that women strengthen our democracy every day. In every presidential election for the last 56 years in the United States, more women have voted than men. More women than ever before serve in the United States Congress. More women than ever are their family's breadwinner. And just last week, the president nominated 2 women to take the helm of 2 of our 11 combatant commands. Women in the United States lead our local, state, and national governments, make major decisions regarding our nation's security, and drive major growth in our economy. These are signs of progress. These are signs of strength. But friends, we cannot take this progress for granted, especially now. COVID-19 has threatened the economic security, the physical security, and the health of women everywhere. As women struggle to get the health care they need, the pandemic appears to be reversing the global gains we've made in the fight against HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, malnutrition, and maternal and child mortality. That's why, on the first day of our administration, the United States re-engaged as a member state and leader in the World Health Organization. And we are revitalizing our partnership with UN Women to help empower women worldwide. Here's the truth. When women face obstacles to obtaining quality health care, when women face food insecurity, when women are more likely to live in poverty and therefore disproportionately impacted by climate change, more vulnerable to gender-based violence and therefore disproportionately impacted by conflict, well, it's harder for women to fully participate in decision-making, which of course in turn makes it that much harder for democracies to thrive. Eleanor Roosevelt, who shaped the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, once said, "Without equality, there can be no democracy." In other words, the status of women is the status of democracy. For our part, the United States will work to improve both. We are committed to upholding the democratic values embedded in the Declaration, and we firmly believe that when we work together globally, we can achieve the vision within it. We look forward to partnering with all of you in the days and years ahead. And thank you.
I thank the Vice President of the United States of America for her statement. We have come to the end of the general debate for this morning. The general discussion of the agenda item 3 will resume on Thursday, 18 March at 11 a.m. There will be no formal or informal meetings by the Commission this afternoon. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the Commission will hold an interactive dialogue on the topic Eliminating Violence Against Women in Public Life on this platform. This meeting is adjourned.